What is going on, everybody? Today we are going to be comparing two of the most popular plated kind of quote unquote super trainers slash daily trainers or plated trainers, and those are the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5, which is kind of a tried and true line from Saucony's. I think it's one of Saucony's most popular models, versus the Nike Zoom Fly 6, one of my favorite plated trainers on the market. It was actually my shoe of the year of 2024. So let's see how these two shoes actually compete against each other. So as always, we are going to start off with the outsoles and the traction performance on both of the two shoes. So the Zoom Fly 6s, I have about 60 to 70 miles on the shoe, and the Endorphin Speed 5s, I have around 40 to 50 miles in the shoe. So not exactly equal, but kind of generally in the same amount of usage. And as you can see, their outsole patterns do look a little bit different. On my right, we have Nike Zoom Fly 6's waffle pattern that Nike typically likes to use on their shoes. And on the left, we have the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5, which has more of an interesting looking pattern, I would say, but a pretty standard looking outsole nonetheless. So speaking on the outsole performance for both of these shoes, I would say that both of them are around average. It's kind of hard to say because I typically run in pretty ideal weather conditions. I do live in Southern California, so it hasn't rained anytime soon. I mostly run on pretty clean roads, with the exception of the roads near the beaches. They do have sand on them, and I don't have any complaints for both of these outsoles. Now, with either shoe on, I would slip a little bit when I was running on sand on the road, but basically I slip with every shoe, so I don't really take that into a consideration when I am grading the outsoles of shoes. But if I will say that I do have a slight preference for one outsole or the other, I would say I would have a slight preference for the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5. When it comes to traction, I just feel like the rubber and the outsole pattern just works a little bit better, and maybe it feels a little bit stickier when I am running on cleaner asphalt. But if you're looking for a review that kind of tests these shoes in rainy or snowy conditions, you might have to look elsewhere to see which traction pattern holds up better in those conditions. So overall, I would say that the traction, I would give a slight edge to the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5, but the Nike Zoom Fly 6 is definitely no slouch. I would say it's at least average when it comes to traction. So moving on to durability, which is the second part of how I evaluate all these outsoles, I would say that the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5's rubber feels a little bit more durable. It does have a few less miles than the Zoom Fly 6 does, but I noticed with Nike's waffle pattern, a lot of the nubs in the forefoot have already kind of degraded, or they kind of got ripped off while I was running already. And I just don't feel that the rubber on this outsole is as durable. It feels a little bit on the softer side on Nike's end. So I don't think that this shoe is gonna last maybe as long. And I also do think that the cushion setup is already starting to kind of not bottom out, but it definitely does feel different than it did right out of the box. So we'll get into the cushion setup in a bit, but for the outsole, I would say that for durability, I give the slight edge to the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5. But the Nike Zoom Fly 6 should last, at least for me, it should last around 200 to 250 miles, which for a lot of shoes, that's kind of the average lifespan with my weight and height and size and everything like that. So I would say that the Nike Zoom Fly 6's outsole durability is maybe slightly below average, and the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 is maybe slightly above average. So I'm gonna give the outsole durability to the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 as well. Now moving on to my favorite part, which is the cushion on both of these shoes. So the Nike Zoom Fly 6, to quickly go over kind of the tech specs, has a full length carbon fly plate, and it does have a high stack of Nike Zoom X as well as an SR02 foam, which I don't really know what it is, on the bottom layer of this shoe. I'll put all like the specifications right here so that I can kind of get it all right. And then the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 has a full-length Power Run PB midsole. It's a little bit lower stacked than the Nike Zoom Fly 6, and it has a winged nylon plate. So it is not carbon like the Nike Zoom Fly 6. So how did these two cushion setups feel, and which one do I prefer? So the Nike Zoom Fly 6 is definitely, I would say, a little bit on the softer side and maybe a little bit less aggressive when it comes to the foam used. I always feel like Nike Zoom X, I don't exactly know if it's the same exact formulation every shoe that Nike puts out. But the Nike Zoom X, in my experience, is typically more on the softer side, and it's not as bouncy or rigid or firm. So you get a kind of a nicer sensation if you run a little bit slower in Nike Zoom X, in my experience. And when you pick up the pace, the foam does adapt a little bit, but you don't get that springy, bouncy feeling underfoot. That's gonna come from the Nike Carbon Fly or Nike Fly carbon plate. It's a full length, pretty thin carbon plate that they put in the Nike Zoom Fly 6, and that's where a lot of the pop comes from. So when it came to long runs, I felt like the carbon plate was helping stabilize the shoe as well as give it that little bit of pop. But when it comes to the foam, I feel like it was just a very comfortable foam, but it wasn't a super bouncy or responsive foam in my opinion. So that's the kind of the reason why this was my shoe of the year last year, just because I really like that it's a more chilled out plated trainer, and maybe because I'm not super fast and I am a little bit on the heavier side, I did feel very protected in this shoe when it came to impact protection and just cushion in general. It is a very comfortable foam if you run a little bit slower, and once you pick up the pace, it does have a little bit more cushion than a lot of the other plated trainers, but I do feel like it adds to that impact protection and it adds to that level of comfort, as well as you can kind of do a wide range of different paces in the shoe, as well as a wide different range of miles that you can do in the shoe. You can do shorter runs, you can do longer runs, you can do slower runs and faster runs, and I feel like the Nike Zoom Fly 6 might not be the best in any one of those categories, but it can definitely hold its own, and it's definitely going to be good enough. So in my experience, I just really like the cushion setup because I do feel like it can replace multiple shoes in your rotation. Whereas in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5s, especially coming from running in the Nike Zoom Fly 6, when you run in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5s, you're gonna feel like these are like Nike free runs. It feels a lot more minimal on foot. You're gonna get a lot more ground feel, as well as the cushion itself is definitely very different to the Nike Zoom Fly 6. So I said that the Nike Zoom Fly 6 is kind of on the softer side and maybe not as bouncy, whereas in my experience with the Endorphin Speed 5s, I did get that slight bounce and that slight spring, and also the cushion setup is just a little bit more firm and minimal, so it is a very stable shoe, and you're really gonna feel the ground. So in my experience, when I am running kind of in that half marathon to marathon pace, as well as, you know, longer runs over 13 miles or over 10 miles for that matter, I do like that it feels a little bit more minimal underfoot sometimes, but only at certain paces, like especially marathon pace and higher, so like marathon pace and slower. I did feel like it was really easy to kind of catch my stride in this shoe, and I feel like when I wasn't really pounding my feet, you know, like how when you're running faster, you're putting more power into your legs and you're kind of like pushing off more. I feel like when I did kind of push off more in this shoe, or I ran faster than marathon pace in this shoe, I just feel like I didn't have enough protection underfoot. That could be a fitness thing, that could be an anatomy thing, or just a preference to me. But I do feel like I wish there was a little bit more foam at times, especially when I am running a faster, longer run. But when I'm running kind of like an easy long run or just kind of easy miles, this setup is extremely comfortable. And when I'm not pounding my feet trying to run faster and put more power into my stride, the cushion is definitely way more than enough, and it's actually very comfortable because I do like that little spring and that kind of ground feel and the minimal feel underfoot. It doesn't feel super bulky like some of these other plated trainers do. Not to say that the Nike Zoom Fly 6 is bulky in any means. I still think that it is a very kind of like nimble package for the amount of cushioning that you get, but the Endorphin Speed 5 definitely has that light, cool feeling underfoot, like where it doesn't feel like you're really wearing anything and you're still kind of protected for those longer runs if you want to go longer. I would just say beware if you're trying to do faster long runs, especially as a heavier runner like myself. I don't know if there's going to be enough impact protection, especially for me. If I were to try to run marathon pace for 20 miles in this shoe, I would be a little bit wary, and I don't know how my body would hold up, to be honest, because I just don't think that there's enough cushion in this shoe to kind of hold up. Now, if I were to do a 20-mile run, but maybe at like, you know, 1 or 2 minutes slower than my marathon pace, you know, like 10 minutes per mile or, you know, like 9:30 per mile, I do think that this shoe has enough impact protection for that. I'm just not putting as much power into my stride on those lengths. So Overall, I would say that the Endorphin Speed 5 feels a lot more minimal than the Nike Zoom Fly 6, but again, it's all personal preference. It's what you also are comfortable running in and kind of what your body needs. I would say the Endorphin Speed 5 feels a little bit more firm, bouncier than the Nike Zoom Fly 6, but both of them are actually very good options if you do want to do longer runs. Now, if you want to do longer, faster runs, I would say that the Nike Zoom Fly 6 is actually maybe a better option. As a bigger runner myself, I feel more protected with the foam that they use, and you still get a little bit of that response and that spring from that full-length carbon plate. Whereas the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5s, I honestly would pick this setup over the Nike Zoom Fly 6's setup if I was running a little bit slower on the long runs, because this shoe is just so lightweight and kind of fun to run in, as well as if the run was under 10 miles and I want to pick up the pace or I wanted to do a shorter speed session, I wouldn't mind this cushion setup in the Endorphin Speed 5. I do want to note also that the winged nylon plate in the Speed 5 is definitely less restrictive than the full-length carbon plate on the Nike Zoom Fly 6. So if that's something that you're curious about, that's my experience with these two shoes. So overall, for cushion setup, it's kind of hard to pick a winner because I do feel like I use these two shoes for different reasons. So I'm gonna say it's probably a tie between the two. Like I said, it really depends on what type of run I'm doing, but both of these setups are really, really good. It's just a matter of matching your preferences to the setup. All right, so now moving on to the uppers and the fit. So we're gonna start off with the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5s. I honestly really like the concept of this upper. It's a very minimal and thin mesh upper. It's basically, just one layer of mesh, and you can really see the perforations throughout the entire upper, which makes for a very lightweight shoe, which I personally really like. The thing that I don't really like about this upper is that I feel like it has almost not enough structure and maybe not enough support. So when I am running faster, especially with the fit not being 100% dialed in, I feel like my foot is moving a little bit in the shoe, or there just isn't enough material maybe surrounding my foot where I feel secure to run as fast as I can, or to, make quick corners, or, run in different directions and whatnot. Obviously, this is not a basketball shoe or a tennis shoe, so I don't really need to do that very often. But I just find myself feeling like there's maybe not enough around my foot when I am running at faster paces. So that might be a very niche thing, but I thought I would mention it. But overall, I do love that this upper is really minimal, lightweight, super breathable, and I just wish that there was a little bit more lockdown or a little bit more material to kind of make me feel more secure in the fit of the shoe. So moving on to the fit of the shoe, I do think that these run true to size. They're a little bit wider foot friendly than Saucony Endorphin Speed 4, which is last year's model, which I personally really like because I have a little bit of a wider foot. But overall, I would still recommend going true to size. I did feel like the heel lockdown, as well as just the amount of space in the forefoot, I think there's just a little bit more volume, and sometimes I didn't feel like 100% locked in, as well as I did have to kind of mess with the laces and this lace setup to kind of get the heel lockdown that I preferred. I ended up going with a setup that actually does not have the runner's loop, and it's been okay for me so far. I also do want to note that this tongue on the upper from Saucony is a little bit short for my liking, and it made it kind of uncomfortable when I did do the runner's loop, as well as the laces were a little bit too short. So overall, I would say get your true size. Definitely consider the Endorphin Speed 5s if you like minimal uppers and you don't like too much around your foot, as well as maybe if you have very sweaty feet, then you're gonna love these. So that's the Endorphin Speed 5's upper and fit. Moving on to the Nike Zoom Fly 6's upper and fit. I think that this is a very good fitting shoe. So going fit first, and then we'll talk about the upper. I do think that these run true to size. Whatever size you typically get in Nikes is the size you're gonna wanna get. It is a little bit more of like a race-like fit, especially when you start breaking in the upper. It's a little bit more on the snug side, but I personally really like it because it makes you feel like you're gonna run faster, and it just fits my foot personally very well. I got my true size 12, have a slightly wider than average foot, and these shoes fit perfectly, especially once the upper material breaks in. So let's talk a little bit about the upper. The upper, like I said, is a little bit more on the snug side, but it is kind of this like plasticky mesh, and I feel like there's two pretty thin layers. Definitely not as breathable as the Endorphin Speed 5s, but still definitely a little bit on the breathable side. It doesn't have too much material on the upper, which I like. The tongue is not my favorite. It kind of has like, it's kind of thin and synthetic, and it has like these puffy things, but it's also gusseted, so it doesn't really move, so it doesn't bother me too much. I just personally wouldn't prefer it if I was designing the shoe. And then the heel lockdown, I also had to kind of mess with the laces on this one because I did feel like the laces bit into my midfoot as well as my ankle area when I was trying to get that snug fit. But overall, after you break in the shoe, and I chose to not do the runner's loop anymore in this shoe, it does fit like a glove, and I personally really do enjoy the fit of this shoe. The upper, I think if you can kind of combine the upper elements of the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 with the lightweightness, the material used, and the breathability with kind of the fit of the Nike Zoom Fly 6, I think that you would have kind of a perfect upper because this upper kind of is more secure and provides a little bit more support. So when I am running faster, I don't feel like there's too much on my feet and my feet don't feel like they're moving or there's not enough surrounding my feet. Whereas in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5, it feels a little bit wild because it feels like there's nothing on your foot, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. So overall for the uppers, just because fit is so important to me and my preferences, I'm gonna have to go with the Zoom Fly 6 on the upper and the fit. I just think that they executed the fit a little bit better and it feels a little bit more fast, especially in a category like this daily trainer category or daily super trainer category. You're gonna want a shoe that fits you really well. Not to say that the Endorphin Speed 5s are bad at all, because I still really enjoy running in them. But when I think plated trainer, I'm thinking faster runs, faster, longer runs. You're really putting in the work for either, half marathon or a marathon. So when I'm thinking about putting more miles into a shoe, I really want the fit to be dialed in. And I think that the Nike Zoom Fly 6's upper is a good combination of lightweight, yet still supportive, yet also fits my foot very well without feeling too bulky. So the upper and fit is definitely gonna go to the Nike Zoom Fly 6. So overall, these two shoes I think are some of the best plated trainers that you can buy currently on the market. Now, talking about price, the Nike Zoom Fly 6 actually got increased to $180, which not too happy about that, but I mean, it is what it is. And then the Endorphin Speed 5s are now $175, a $5 increase from last year's Endorphin Speed 4s. So I think these are kind of around the same ballpark with regards to pricing. But if I had to pick one shoe, I would still go with the Nike Zoom Fly 6 just because I feel like it's a little bit more versatile. You're getting a little bit more cushioning. It's gonna accommodate a little bit different types of runs as well. Like maybe you won't get that low to the ground feel that you would get in the Endorphin Speed 5, and it's not gonna be as lightweight as the Endorphin Speed 5, but I think overall it's just a little bit more versatile of a shoe. I like that they give more cushion in this shoe too, so that for me personally, I feel more confident running longer runs in the shoe without banging up my body too bad. So just for that, I'm gonna give the slight edge to the Nike Zoom Fly 6, but I do really enjoy the Endorphin Speed 5. I think it's a fun shoe to run in. It feels like you're wearing nothing. And I do like that slight bounce that Saucony's midsoles kind of always give, like with Power Run PB or Power Run Plus or whatever formulation they come up with or they actually name it. Typically, Saucony's shoes or Saucony's midsoles are the bounciest to me, or in my opinion. So I really enjoyed the ride of this Endorphin Speed 5. I just feel like the upper could need a little bit of work, maybe a little bit more structure, as well as the fit could be dialed in just a touch more. But other than that, it's a fantastic shoe. And if you're looking for a more minimal shoe, like you don't want such a high stack plated trainer, this is going to be one of the more, I guess, rare shoes on the market because nowadays everyone's putting in a lot of stack in their shoes. So it is nice to have kind of a more minimal with a lot of ground feel plated daily trainer. So that's gonna pretty much wrap up my comparison between the Saucony Endorphin Speed 5 versus the Nike Zoom Fly 6. If you have either of these shoes or you have both of the shoes, I would love to hear your comment section down below. If you have any questions, please reach out. I try my best to respond to everyone. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video.